Welcome to our third lecture in human tissues. So we are still in our study of histology, right? So remember that histology is the study of tissues. And so all of our 50 trillion cells can be classified as one of 4 different types of body tissues. And all 4 of our body tissues are going to come together to make discrete structures called organs, and then organs with common goals create our 11 body or organ system. So we have the muscular tissue, connective tissue, nervous tissue, and epithelial tissue. So with the glands, we are still in epithelial tissue. So we are still investigating epithelial tissue. Part of the linings of our body includes specialized cells that secrete substances like sweat or hormones, and they make up our glands. So that will be the focus of today's specialized epithelium of glandular epithelium. A gland is an organ, or it can be one single cell. Sometimes there are cells within our tissues that will release hormones that influence the activity of the other cells that make up the tissue. So they're kind of like the boss. And then that gland or organ will secrete a hormone or some other substance. So whether it's one cell or an entire organ that is secreting the substance, typically that substance is going to be used elsewhere in the body, or it will be released for elimination. We need to get it out of the body. This gland is typically going to be composed of epithelial tissue that is surrounded in a framework of connective tissue, and then there is typically a connective tissue capsule around that gland. When these glands are doing secretion, this is where they are releasing a product that is useful to the body. So it's going to be used by another cell, or it's going to benefit the body somehow. Excretion is where we're trying to get rid of a waste product. Glandular epithelium is going to form glands, and these glands are going to produce and secrete products. And the cells that make up this glandular epithelium have specialized. And so they have a specific job, and their one job is to secrete a material, whether that material is a digestive juice like hydrochloric acid in the stomach, or maybe it's a hormone like thyroid hormone, or maybe it's milk from the mammary glands, perspiration, which is sweat by the sweat glands, and there are even specialized cells that make waxes like your earwax. So these are all pictures of histological slides of glandular epithelium. And you can see that a lot of this glandular epithelium has those goblet cells, right, that are secreting mucus. So a gland is going to be made up of a group of cells that will secrete some kind of fluid that's needed by the body. And these cells are specialized to secrete that substance. The way that we classify these glands are going to be in 2 ways, similar to the epithelium that we just talked about. However, we're going to look at the complexity of the gland and then how the substances are secreted. So if you look at the images to the left, there is a very simple gland that just goes deep into the body and there's that lining epithelium, and then you'll see the cells that do the actual secretion of the substance. These are those glandular epithelial cells. And so that can be very simple, where it's just one duct. A duct is the tube that goes into the gland, or that duct can be complex, where we have lots of different branches as we go deeper into the tissue. So we can look at complexity. And so these two glands vary in complexity. The glands can even be, like we mentioned previously, unicellular. And then we're also going to look at how the glands secrete their substance. There are exocrine glands and endocrine glands. So this is where those prefixes are going to be very, very helpful. Exo, think of exits or leaves. And endo, think of like within. Exocrine glands are going to maintain their contact with the surface of the epithelium through a duct. Therefore, the surfaces can be external, like our sweat glands or our tear glands that are in our eyes. The surfaces can also be internal. We can have our salivary glands that release their substance into a duct and it goes into our mouth, or the pancreas cells will release their substance into the pancreatic duct that will then combine and bring their substance to the small intestines. Where endocrine glands, these do not have ducts. Okay, and they are going to release their substance directly into the blood. So there's going to be many blood capillaries that are very intertwined and entangled within the endocrine glands. They will secrete a hormone directly into the blood. So these hormones are made inside of those cells. And those hormones, they are chemical messengers. And those chemical messengers will be released directly into the blood, where they will be carried throughout the body. And they will act on a cell and stimulate that cell that's located somewhere else. So the blood had to carry the hormone to that cell. So examples of this, think of your endocrine organs, the thyroid, the adrenal glands, the pituitary glands. So exocrine glands will secrete their substances outward through a duct. So you're going to have that lining epithelium, and it's going to go deep into the body, and it's going to create a tube or a duct. And then you're going to have the exocrine cells that are making their product, and they are secreting that product into the duct. The duct will fill up, and then the product will spill out of the duct and line that free surface of the lining epithelium. Where the endocrine glands, these are ductless. So your endocrine cells are going to line a blood vessel. And so these guys are making their hormone, and when they release their hormone, they're going to release that hormone directly into the blood, and as the blood travels through that gland, they will consistently release that hormone directly into the bloodstream. Here we have a side-by-side comparison of the exocrine glands, showing a complex exocrine gland. And then you have the endocrine gland here, which is showing the direction of blood flow. So this is creating a capillary bed. And that capillary makes contact with every single cell that is in that endocrine gland. So that cell will release its hormone directly into that blood flow. This is a nicer picture of the general structure of the endocrine gland. So you'll have a cluster of cells that are making up this endocrine gland, and you'll have blood supply coming from an artery, and those arteries will get smaller and smaller and smaller until it is eventually so small that only one blood cell can fit through at a time. So these really tiny, tiny blood vessels are called capillaries. And those red blood cells literally have to go in single file line through that blood capillary. And then there's the cells, and each one of these cells makes contact with the capillary. And so their product can diffuse past a very thin layer of simple squamous epithelium that makes up the lining of that capillary, and then the hormone is in the blood and it can be carried away in the bloodstream. Unicellular glands, uni means one, so this is a gland that is one cell. These are typically found in epithelium that is non-secretory, meaning it does not secrete substances. So, for example, we have the mucus-secreting goblet cells that we find in the trachea, or there are cells within the stomach that are called enteroendocrine cells, and they will tell the other cells in the stomach how much hydrochloric acid to produce, how much mucus to make. They'll even release hormones that tell other cells further down the gastrointestinal tract that, hey, we have food coming through, so you need to start making room in the large intestines for this incoming food. And when we look at the gland structure, typically what we'll see is there's going to be some cells that are performing the actual task, like making a hormone and secreting the hormone, or making mucus, or making hydrochloric acid and secreting that. So these cells that are actually doing the secretion will typically be a simple cuboidal epithelium. And then there's going to be some connective tissue around those cells. And what is going to create this framework of the gland that supports and organizes the glandular tissue is called the stroma. And this stroma will organize into these extensions that are called septa. And the septa will form lobes within the gland. And the outermost portion of the gland is typically covered by a capsule. So this is just a connective tissue that is anchoring that gland into its place in the body. So here we have just a general gland. So the outer layer of that gland that's anchoring the gland in place so it doesn't just roll all around the body is the capsule, right? So that's going to be a connective tissue that holds it in place. And then we have a duct, right? And so that duct is going to go deep into this gland. And that duct will eventually fill up with a product. So what is actually secreting the product are those cells that are typically simple cuboidal in shape. So they are referred to as acini cells. Those are the specialized epithelial cells that are synthesizing, storing, and secreting a substance, right? So these are the guys that are a simple cuboidal epithelium. And so here they are zoomed in here, right? And then you have the lining epithelium that is going to be forming the duct. But these acini cells, acinus is just plural, they are going to release their substance, and that substance is going to eventually fill up the duct. And then it will travel through the duct and eventually go into the apical surface of the epithelial tissue. When we have glands releasing their substance into a duct, we're going to classify that gland by the structure of their duct. And then we're going to look at how they release their substance. So if the duct is simple and it just goes deep into the body, there's no branches, that's a simple. If there starts to be branching, that is said to be compound. And then we're going to look at the deep portion where we have the endocrine cells that are actually secreting the substance. So the acinar cells are the actual cells that are releasing their substance. Okay, these are the cells that are creating and storing and releasing their substance. And then there's going to be a transitional period where we go from the secretory cells to the narrow tubular portion. So that transition area, those cells are called tubular acinar or tubular alveolar, right? And so they're going to be found in the secretion portion and going up into that narrow portion. The more narrow portion that's closer to the apical surface of the epithelial tissue, that is the tubular portion, right? And so usually those are uniform in diameter. Here we've got some pictures and it's nice and color coded. So the cells that are kind of tannish, that shows you the duct. Where the purple cells, those are going to show you the cells that are actually the acini cells that are doing the secretion of the substance. So figure A is looking at a simple coiled tubular gland like your sweat glands. And so these cuboidal cells will release their sweat into the duct, and that duct will fill up and eventually spill out. B is a compound acinar gland, like what we find in the mammary glands. So the actual cells that are doing the secretion are deep within those branches. And then you have the ductal cells that are going to come together. And where we find the tubular acinar cells, that would be like here in between, like right in between the duct and the secreting cells. So like what we see right here in image C, these are those compound tubular acinar cells. So we will find those in the kind of connection pieces. We're also going to classify glands by their secretions. Serous glands produce thin, watery secretions, such as perspiration or your sweat, milk, tears, digestive juices. While mucus glands, they are going to produce glycoprotein called mucin. Glycoprotein mucin absorbs water to form mucus, so it's much thicker. It's not watery now, such as the goblet cells. Those are unicellular mucus glands. And then you're going to have mixed glands that contain both serous and mucus cell types that will produce a mixture of the two types of secretion. So for example, you have salivary glands in your chin and there's one on each side. Those salivary glands are a mixed gland. So eccrine or merocrine glands, these glands will secrete their substance into a duct by exocytosis. And I like to use merocrine because that prefix mero means part. So these glands will part ways with their substance. They will open up their cell membrane and just release their substance through exocytosis. This is what happens in your sweat glands. Apocrine glands, apo means tip. So in these apocrine glands, a portion of the cell that has the secreted product stored in it will actually pinch off along with the secreted product. And apo means tip. So here you see a little cell, he's making his substance, and he's going to start to pinch off the part of the cell that has the milk. And then that pinched off portion of the cell will be released into a duct, and it will be collected as it's being released. And then the cell can continue to grow a little bit more and make more product, and then pinch off the tip and have it continually produce its product and release that way. Holocrine, the prefix means whole. And so these cells will rupture and spill their product into the duct. So these cells will actually undergo lysis or rupture of the cell membrane in order to release their substance. So for example, you have oil glands that are called sebaceous glands in your skin, especially in the scalp and face area where we have more hair. And these cells will rupture, dying, and spilling their oil contents into a duct. Here are some nice images from your book about the 3 modes of exocrine secretion. Here we have that ecrine or merocrine, where there's like some sugar and protein. It's being made inside of the cell, so you can see that the cell is packaging its little protein up into this vesicle, and then that substance is going to have to be released. So it's transported to the cell membrane where the vesicle will fuse with the cell membrane and release its substance right into that free space. The apocrine glands, they will also be making their product, such as milk. And so milk is actually pretty fatty. So these substances will be made and packaged in the vesicles, and then those vesicles will be released along with the product. So that instead of fusing with the cell membrane and releasing its substance like we see in the merocrine, ecrine glands, that vesicle is going to pinch off and it's going to be released that way. Whereas you have your holocrine glands, these glands are going to have the intact cells down at the bottom. And as the cells fill up with their oil, they start to disintegrate and die. And those intact basal cells will be doing the mitosis to replace the cells that are dying. And those are the holocrine glands. Examples of the ecrine or merocrine glands that release their products via exocytosis, again, are going to be your tear glands, glands in the pancreas, gastric, so your stomach glands. The apocrine glands, this is going to be where there's like a lipid droplet that is still in that vesicle, just like the cell membrane. And the vesicle just kind of buds off of the surface, like what we find in the mammary glands. And then the holocrine glands are the cells that will accumulate their product until the entire cell just disintegrates. And so when they are secreting their substance, like the oil found in our oil glands, there's also going to be a mixture of cell fragments and other substances that the cell was making when it was alive. I'm going to pause this one here and make a second video for membranes because we are already at 24 minutes. So I will see you in a bit.